Hi everyone, I'm Caroline. Welcome to Time Out with Tinseltown Mom. Today I'm going to be talking to mental health advocate and author Achea Redd. Achea is the founder of the community Real Girls F.A.R.T, which is the acronym for Fearless, Authentic, Rescuer, and Trailblazer. She's also the wife of NBA legend Michael Redd and mom of two. Achea was diagnosed with depression and generalized anxiety disorder in 2016. Ashamed of her condition, she hid it, which only made things worse. We're going to be talking about that today. Plus, we're going to talk about how being an NBA player's wife affected her mental health. Hi, Achea. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Caroline. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you for being here. I'm very excited to talk to you today, especially about such an important topic and one that you're really shedding light on, mental health.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it's become quite the buzzwords these days on
Yes.
social media, and it's becoming more of a thing, which I think, is pretty awesome.
Yeah, I feel the same, that more people are talking about it, just within motherhood, especially with children. People are bringing more attention to it, which I think is great. So let's start by getting to know you a little bit better. Can you tell us a little bit about you and your family?
My husband and I, Michael, as you mentioned in the intro here, we've been married we will make 14 years this year. And we will have been together for 17. And we're each other's best friends. We knew each other when we were young. Our parents went to the same church. Both of our fathers are pastors. So, we've kind of been around each other for a while. And we reconnected after college and got married and had two wonderful kids, Michael and Arden. And Michael is the second, not a junior. He will let you know that.
There is a
And
difference.
yeah, exactly. And he is 12 years old, and our daughter Arden is 9. But we're just like that, very typical, family. And we try to raise our kids in the most normal way, if you know that whatever is normal, as possible, and not really, handing them a bunch of things, but teaching them the values of like working hard and all of that, which was why when I started blogging about my mental health struggles and challenges, this was about 3.5 years ago, and my kids were very young at the time, but we've always just um, told them about the importance of being authentic and speaking your truth, and not only telling them that, but showing them through the way that we do life. And so, yeah, it's definitely been a journey. I think my mental health journey has been, difficult for the family in many ways because I've been so public about it, and also I am a public figure. So, but it's also been a blessing in that, they have been able to be more real and authentic about, what they go through as well.
Right, right. So just going back a little bit more just into your childhood, because I understand that this, transpired a little bit further into your life, the mental health or the
Oh,
mental
yeah.
illness, but it just wasn't brought to light until recently. So I know you
Yeah.
were a pastor's kid, right?
Yeah. Yes. And, you know, being a Black woman and then being in the church, a pastor's kid, there are like three different things, right? So there's like just being Black in general, mental health, mental illness. That is not what we talk about. Like,
Mm-hmm.
we just don't discuss that. And then also, not only am I Black, but I'm a Black woman, which means that, we have the invisible capes around us, right? That we
Mm-hmm.
are superheroes, the backbone, the strength of our families. And then the third thing that I had to overcome as a kid is just being the daughter of a pastor, meaning that, okay, you've got to behave a certain way. You've got to make sure that everything looks good, even if it's not good. And then, you could just pray it away.
Yeah, that's
You don't have
pressure.
to. yeah, the pressure exactly of like, well, if I am still struggling, then that must mean that I don't have enough faith, or that, God is not hearing me, and there must be something that I'm doing wrong. And so I lived in that shame storm and told myself that story over and over again, and that kept me from seeking treatment for many years.
So when do you think, like if you can just look back on your past, like when do you think that mental illness for you started, but you just kind of, you didn't understand what it was? Like how young were you, do you think?
Gosh, Terrellon, I think I was probably like 8. My mom and dad were separated on and off about 4 times between the ages of 0 and 5 for me. So there was a lot of up and down, in and out, coming and going. And that was a crazy making in itself. And I remember as a kid, like having stomach trouble. And I would always complain about, having a stomach ache. And now as an adult, I realize that what we're finding, the more that we are studying mental illness, is that the majority of our serotonin lives within our gut. And so if a child is complaining about belly aches or stomach issues, most of the time it's probably an anxiety issue, that we need to like dig a little deeper, and not just, go straight to the, well, what have you eaten? And, have you used the restroom? Or, those are fine questions as well, but we also need to dig a little deeper, because that's typically where it starts in a kid, is in their stomach. So I would say probably when I was 8 years old, elementary school, um, you know, things didn't go right on the playground, stomach ache. Things didn't go right at home, stomach ache. Bad grade, stomach ache. Not being able to perform to the level of where everyone thought as a pastor's daughter I should perform to. That gave me stomach problems. And
Wow.
so those stomach problems kind of followed me through my adolescence into my teenage years. And when I was 15 years old, I do remember, even though I didn't know what to call it then, my first anxiety attack. I describe it in my book that was dating a guy and wasn't supposed to have a boyfriend, by the way. And so all of that is a secret. So I can't really tell anybody in my household what's going on, but found out that he liked someone else more than me, and just normal typical teenage stuff that was always extra for me, just because of the issue with anxiety. And I fell out, and nose started bleeding, and just all kinds of things that were very scary, that I didn't have a name for. And then probably when I got to about 17 was when I started having migraines, and my mom was super concerned. And so that was the one thing that she took me to the doctor for, because of course, like, you could give a name to it. It was a
Mm-hmm.
headache. It's a
Yeah.
migraine. So I was being taken to, the neurologist and just all kinds of doctors. And the doctor was, talking to me and said, "Hey, I can't find anything, but I do think that you have some stress going on in your life." And that was the first time at 17 that they didn't diagnose me with anything, but this was a neurologist that prescribed me my first antidepressant. And it really helped. And it really made me feel better, but I didn't put two and two together. So I was just like, oh, don't need that anymore. And I stopped taking the medicine, just, no weaning off, just stopped taking it after a few months. And, everything seemed to be pretty chill except for when stress, came into my life. But I wasn't married and I didn't have kids at the time. So I was able to manage it. But
Mm-hmm.
I think it was when I got married and became a mom, and was living that MBA wife life,
Mm-hmm.
where there was constant attention on me. Um, I think that was what maybe put me over the edge.
Yeah. So just because we're gonna get to that life. But before that, I understand that even as a teenager you suffered from an eating disorder and there were some suicidal thoughts. Is that true?
Yeah. So when I was 12, and my dad, I think, all of our parents, like, they do the best that they can. But when I was 12, I don't know if you've experienced this in your life, but it was like, oh girl, you don't want to get too fat. You need to stop eating all of that, and so it was just a constant fear of, not physically being attractive and associating the word fat with not being enough, or the word fat and being, disgusting. And so it made me afraid of, to gain any weight, afraid of food. It kind of stepped in right in between me and my relationship with food. And I began to restrict and withhold food for myself. And I was very sick for a long time. I actually am just now starting to get to the place of recovery where I can actually talk about it from a place of being recovered. Because eating disorders are one of the hardest mental illnesses to recover from, because it's never really about the food. It's always about you wanting or needing control.
Mm-hmm.
And that food is meeting, or the absence of the food is meeting some type of need in your life. It was really meeting the need to be in control and for me to be accepted and acceptable. And unfortunately, when I was at my sickest, I got a lot of attention.
Mm.
And that affirmed that even though it was negative, that I was doing the right thing.
Right.
And so that eating disorder started at 12 when my dad told me that I needed to watch it and that I was getting fat. And it went all the way into my adulthood. And so, if I wasn't working out, then I couldn't eat. Or if I, there were a list of foods that I had that were like my no foods. Um, and I couldn't have them because that meant that, I was going to get fat.
Mm-hmm.
And so preoccupied with every morsel of food that I put in my mouth, and what that would do to me from the external perspective of things, that I just became obsessed and so fixated on it. So yeah, so that was, that was what I dealt with. And even still, like to this day, like I have to work very hard to stay in a good place when it comes to my body image and my relationship with food. And there were times where I don't want to say that I necessarily like felt suicidal. I think it was more like I felt like I wanted to disappear.
Mm.
But it was never like I wanted to harm myself as much as it was like I want to just get in my car and I want to just drive as far west as I can possibly drive and just never come back and never tell anybody where I went, because I feel like everyone in my life is so much better off without me in it.
Hmm. So these were thoughts that you had when you were a teenager. You were suffering
Yeah.
from an eating disorder. There was some mental illness, was anxiety and probably depression when you were a
Yeah.
teenager.
Yeah.
So fast forward, you become a young adult and you meet your husband, your soon-to-be husband, Michael. So
Mhm.
how did that transpire?
So at the time, we were both 23 years old, and we were both, still very connected to our faith. And so he would come back to Columbus, Ohio, which is where we both were born and raised, on his off season. Um, and a friend of his was attending my father's church sometimes, and he saw me there. I used to sing during the worship time, and so his friend would see me up there, and he would go back and he would tell him, like, Michael, like, you're looking for someone. I'm telling you, like, you need to come check this girl out. And Michael was just like, oh man, like, I think I remember her from like back in the day. Like our dads used to go to the same church, blah, blah, blah. And he was like, yeah, he was like, I'm going to try to like, meet her. So he tried for like a month and a half to come see me on a Sunday night, but he didn't realize that we weren't having church on or services on Sunday nights during the summer. And so all of his attempts to meet me failed until one day, one Sunday morning, actually, I was at church early, and a friend of mine who is a friend of this guy who's mutual friends with Michael and I, said, "Hey, Achea, you know, this guy was telling me that Michael's trying to meet you." And I'm like, "Who?" I'm like, I'm not into basketball. I'm not like a sports fan. Like, here I am thinking, like, I'm living my life thinking that, like, if I was going to get married, it was like my destiny to marry, like, I don't know, some preacher or something, because that was what my mom did. It was just not,
Mm-hmm.
it never occurred to me that I was going to marry an athlete. So,
You were going to be a
uh,
first lady.
yeah, yeah. I mean, as a pastor's daughter, you are groomed.
Yeah.
That is your expected path. And if you like do anything else, like, you are the black sheep. And so I literally, was just like, I don't know, like, he can't possibly be a Christian because he's playing in the league, and that whole stereotype. I
Mm-hmm.
was just very judgmental and stereotypical when it came to my thoughts about him. And finally, I asked enough questions, like my curiosity that, I pride myself on, finally, got me, talked myself into meeting him. And so I decided to, like, okay, I'm going to meet Michael. And so we decided to meet each other at a video game place. It was called GameWorks back in the day. And so we met each other. It's kind of like a Dave and Buster's sort of thing.
Oh, okay.
So we met each other, and he's like all three-pieced, suited out, and like, here I am, and like, this was back, in the early 2000s, when, like, the big wide leg, like, cargo khakis and the little tiny shirts were in.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, I'm wearing that, and I'm thinking, I'm so, like, fly, and I see him all dressed up, and I'm like, what the heck? Like, either I'm an idiot, or like, he is just like way overdressed. And we sat down. Let's see. So we met, I want to say August the 10th. And so we've been like talking to each other ever since.
Wow.
And that was back in 2003.
Okay. Now, was he playing for the NBA when you guys
Yes.
first met? Okay. So tell us
Yes.
what that was like. So you're this young woman with this undiagnosed mental illness, and
Yeah.
all this pressure that you put upon yourself. And then you go into the spotlight, basically. Like, this is a huge spotlight that you're in, being the wife of an NBA player. What was that
Yeah.
like?
Oh my gosh. It was maddening. Like, because you come from, like, I'm used to the spotlight being on me, being a PK and everything, but it was like different. Like, this was like not church. I don't know these people. These people could give a care who my dad is and that I could sing. So it was like a totally different dynamic shift. All the attention was on him. And I'm just like, oh my gosh. Like, and first of all, I'm undiagnosed, right? I'm
Yeah.
insecure.
Right.
I don't like really like myself that much, or feel like I have, like, I've spent most of my life asking myself, why me, why me, why me, why me, I don't deserve,
Mm-hmm.
and shrinking myself. So going into that kind of a situation, like, you either have to, like, have your confidence together, or you need to fake it till you make it. And
Mm-hmm.
I was not good at either one of those things. So I think inside I was a ball of nerves. I was so tense that, like, it was weird because it was cool that people didn't know me, and so I could kind of like reinvent myself, but it was like, what would I reinvent myself to?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
you know so it was just it was very scary for me. And I fought a lot. I fought those inner demons, those inner voices a lot, with not being good enough, not being worthy. um Early in our, relationship, when we were dating each other, I think I found myself self-sabotaging a little bit the relationship, because I just didn't feel like I deserved to be there.
Mm-hmm.
I felt like he could have picked, or he could have had anybody else. Why he chose me, like, I'll never know. And this is what I'm thinking then.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what I would tell myself over and over again, which is really not being very nice to yourself.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really being very mean and just ruthless to yourself. And the very things that I experienced when I was in school, being bullied and things like that, and I grew up in a very critical household as well. I was doing those same things to myself.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was making, the undiagnosed situation
Mm-hmm.
1,000 times worse.
Yeah. So give us a glimpse into that. So you're undiagnosed. Like, give us a scenario where maybe you were in a setting, because all we see is, or people see, is like the MB player wives on the reality
Yeah.
shows. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So, so what does that look
Yeah.
like? Let's say, you're in a scenario, you're in a setting, you're at dinner, etc., with other wives or basketball players. What is your mental illness like? Give us an example of how it reared its ugly head, in a certain pressure type scenario, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah, it does. So I want to say that like I'm a really good actress. And
Okay.
like I knew how to like hide, like I knew how to like not like show my sweat, but like I was sweating bullets inside.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I will tell you one of the things that was really crazy was like I would try to get to the arena like way before like any of the other wives would get to the arena and like get to my seat because the I called it like the walk of horror because
Mm.
like when you come into that tunnel,
Mm-hmm.
all of the girlfriends, wives, like it really was like girlfriends or fiancés and wives, like um the side chicks, because that's a real thing too. But
Yeah.
like they don't get access to the family room, but like the serious girlfriends who are like, maybe not engaged, but they're like they should be basically. They've been
Yeah.
around long enough to be, or like, the fiancés or the wives, like they all get access to the family room. And so I had that, that option, but I just like I didn't want to do it. I was like, oh my gosh, this is like walking into like a classroom, like a
Mm.
lunchroom.
And you're being
So I was like, okay,
judged.
I'm just gonna hurry up and go to my seat. And then, that way I'm already sitting. And then that way I can like size everybody up first.
Right.
So the moments that were worse than everything else was when I did not get there on time
Mm.
and all the wives got there first and I was late and I had to walk in and I like all eyes like on you. Like when you walk in and they see you walk past a certain part of the arena, past a certain section of seats, they know exactly where you're going.
Mm.
Because all set in the same place.
Right.
And I was just like, oh my gosh. And in my head, I was having conversations with myself like, I wonder if people are like talking about what I have on. Is this designer enough? Is this like, I mean, because that is the thing.
Yeah, and they do talk
Like,
about that. They definitely do.
yes, it's a thing. I mean, like, I hate to say it because like people have asked me before, like, oh, you're an NBA wife. Like, what we see on TV, like, is that? I'm like, yeah, a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it can be real. Like, it just depends on who it is. But it's a thing, like what you have on, how big your ring is, what purse you're carrying, like all of that, what your
Yeah.
hair looks like,
Right.
your makeup, like all of that, like you are, no one cares like about who you are as a person and what you have inside when you walk into that tunnel
Mm-hmm.
and into that game. You are eye candy. You are
Yeah.
trophy and you better play that part.
Yeah. Now, did you find yourself hanging out with the other wives, girlfriends, etc., and comparing yourself? Like, what was that like? I'm sure that was pressure.
Yeah. You know what? I think for me, the hardest part about hanging out with the other girlfriends and wives, unfortunately, Milwaukee, fortunately for us, was a very small market. So it wasn't, like a Miami or, maybe as big of a market as like in LA or New York or something. So it was pretty tame, but it was, you know, I would see other girlfriends that have been around longer, obviously, or women that were fiancés, and I'd be like, man, like I'm not there yet. And I would compare myself, me and Michael's relationship to them and like the kinds of things that they were able to do versus what I was able to do. So like if we were traveling with them, with the guys, like as a team, like they would just have access to be able to go and shop. Well, I couldn't do that. So it was like, it was weird. I was just like, oh my gosh, like this is so different. This is so not who I am, what I am. Like, how am I ever going to fit into this world?
Right.
And am I ever meant to fit in this world? And I think it got better as I became, fiance and then became a wife. Like it became a lot different because obviously our relationship, had to develop just like every other relationship has to develop right into those things. But then I had to question myself is like, well, why am I comparing myself to so and so and their fiance because she gets to go and shop and buy certain things? Like, what makes me think that I have the right to do that? Like, so it called me to the carpet on so many things, but then it also called me to the carpet on so many of the insecurities that was hiding, beneath the surface.
Right. So, give us a little scenario of what it looked like, because I know you were diagnosed with depression and generalized anxiety disorder. What is generalized anxiety disorder? How is that different from anxiety disorder?
So generalized anxiety is basically anything that, for me, good stress and bad stress alike, my body perceives everything as bad stress. So like, for example, if I am, like I got to get up and, do a big keynote speech, right? That, anxiety is not always bad, right? Anxiety is going to help us with our adrenaline, like pick up a car that's on top of a child. It's going to help us, do the best at a competition, or it's good like when you are, speaking in front of people, like it gives you that, like, yes, I'm going to do this, that push. Well, yeah, my body doesn't perceive it as good though. My body perceives it as that's bad. Doing a speech is a tiger chasing after me. And I'm like, no, that's not quite the same thing. But my brain doesn't perceive good stress and bad stress as different. It's just stress. And so my body just releases all of this adrenaline for things that may not even be necessary.
Yeah.
And so I'm constantly in a state of fight or flight. I think that would be the main difference, is that I don't have like I don't have a panic disorder, but there are certain people that have an anxiety disorder and a panic disorder. Meaning that like the way that I feel anxiety, they like feel anxiety plus as soon as they feel it, they go into a panic automatically. That's not me. I don't go into a panic automatically where I start hyperventilating and things. I can have anxiety moments where I don't go into a panic attack.
Okay. So take us back before 2016, because 2016 is when you were diagnosed. So before the diagnosis,
Yeah.
Being an NBA player's wife, which has a lot of stress and pressure, give us an example of when you had an example of a depressive mood or a real extreme anxiety case. Like, what did that look like?
So it's funny. I like to say that depression and anxiety are sisters. Okay. They hold hands. It's very rare to have one without the other. So for me, I found myself like super heightened about something. Like it could have been just like that same story, like the thoughts, like the reoccurring thoughts that like a hamster wheel. So you think of a hamster wheel and you think of like my thoughts just kind of on a reel, just going on and on and on. I'm not good enough. I need to prove myself. Like, why is he with me? Like, every bad thing I could think about myself, just kind of replaying in my head.
Yeah.
And so what happened is I would be fixated and preoccupied with those thoughts so much that I would wear myself out to a point where I had beat myself down and I was just sad. And I couldn't function. I couldn't come, I didn't want to come out of my room. I didn't want to socialize. I didn't want to talk to anyone. It kept me very closed off from forming, relationships with people. Um, I think a lot of the reason why I left, the NBA without really solid friendships with the ladies was because of my own, undiagnosed mental illness at the time.
Yeah. Now, what did Michael think, like when you were withdrawn, for example, you didn't want to come out of your room or socialize? Like, what did he think
Yeah.
all of this was, or how did he respond to that?
Um, he didn't understand it, honestly. I mean, like, he didn't understand it. And just like me, he didn't know what to call it. He just thought I was like not a people person.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't like people. And that I thought I, was better and I wasn't very social or wasn't very, relatable or, like that. That's what he thought. And we had a lot of conversations that were like intense where, before I got diagnosed, before I knew what to call it, like we would argue about that. And I'd be like, no, it's not that I don't like people. And I had a hard time articulating what it was. I was just like, I don't know. I just feel like I have a hard time like making small talk.
Mm-hmm.
Like he's really good at making small talk with people. And I think he had to be because of, his career. And for me, it was just, very difficult, to make small talk and to like, you know, find things, to talk about and that I have in common and like, but I also, was very insecure and I didn't want to admit that. Like I kind of felt like I was insecure and I kind of had words for that, but I didn't know how to say that without sounding weak.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't want to tell him like, well, I'm really just super insecure and I think that this girl is like way better than me and I don't really think that I deserve to be your girlfriend or your fiance and I just didn't have the verbiage or the maturity, to be able to say that to him.
So, fast forward, what prompted you to get diagnosed in 2016?
I had a nervous breakdown.
Wow.
Yeah. It literally, I say this very, very often. If you don't deal with life, life will deal with you.
Mm-hmm.
And there is something about, your body. There's, we have like energy in our body and like it remembers the things that we say. It remembers, like, it does keep score of like trauma and things like that that happens. And I'm a firm believer that in order to like truly be resilient and recover, you have to kind of like deal with the stuff that has gotten you off kilter.
Mm-hmm.
And I just, was not willing to do that. I had gone through a really long stint of depression. So this time it was depression, first and not anxiety. And it was, I want to say 90 straight days of like not being motivated to do anything, not wanting to come out of my room, but forcing myself because I had children at the time. And I wasn't able to function. So I have a full on like anxiety attack where panic attacks, like not sleeping for 48 hours, not eating. I lost probably 10 to 12 pounds in a week's time.
Wow.
Wasn't hydrating, like just could barely even exercise. Like, in fact, exercise actually made me more anxious.
Mm.
And there was just, it was nothing I could do. Like, it was to the point where I was afraid to go to sleep at night because I knew I wasn't going to go to sleep.
Hmm.
And I was just so tired of being tired, you know, and just these fights that I was having internally. So, um, I, about a week after, you know, having recurrent panic attacks and not sleeping, I developed a tremor. And my body literally felt like, you know, when you shiver,
Mm-hmm.
you're cold. That was how my body shook internally. No one else could see it on the outside of me, but like everyone, like, and they were looking at me like, what are you talking about? I can't see it. So no one could see it. I could feel it though.
Hmm.
And it was like more, and like I would be laying there trying to like be still. So I worked myself up so much to thinking like, okay, no, this is like, this is terrible. I have MS. I have like a nervous disorder. Like, but really what that was my anxiety, like on a whole nother level, like telling me that I have some illness. So I am Googling it, like trying to figure it out. And everything is pointing to like MS. And I'm like, oh my God, this is awful. So like I've already like, by the way, eulogized myself, like given myself the diagnosis off
Yeah.
of WebMD or Dr. Google.
Oh yeah, that's why we need to stay off of Google when we have
Yes,
symptoms.
yes, yes. And I went to the doctor. I finally,
uh,
I had delayed going to the doctor about this tremor that I had developed because I was scared of what he was gonna say.
yeah.
And I finally was just like, my husband talked me into it. And he was just like, you need to go. Like, you've got to go. So I go. Doctor says, listen, I know what that tremor looks like. I know what, you know, what you think you probably have, but this is not it. He was like, based on your symptoms and what you're telling me and your blood pressure right now, because it was like stroke level
Mm,
high. He was like, you have what we call GAD or generalized anxiety disorder.
interesting.
And he's asking me a bunch of questions about like what was going on in my life and maybe wondering if it was situational or if it was something that, you know, is just a way of life and I need to be medicated for it. And he says, if you don't believe me, he says, this is how I'm going to prove to you I'm right. He says, you're going to leave here and you are going to leave here and you are going to basically think that I am not telling you the truth, and you're going to call me and you're going to ask me again, like, is this, you know, is this the truth? Sure enough, 2 days later, I call him back and I'm like, you sure that I don't have MS? So I, you know, did everything he told me that I was going to do.
Mm-hmm.
I did because I was like, this can't be. Like, this cannot be as simple as anxiety. Because all I was ever taught anxiety was just nervousness. I was never taught that it was a disorder.
Yeah.
That there are people who literally live nervous, like on steroids nervous every day of their lives.
Mm-hmm.
And so I made the decision at that time to go on medication. Um, and there was even in my mind shame associated with that because I'm just like, man, like I really don't want to, you know, go through this, like taking medication. Like there's so much stigma, you know, about people who take medication and, you know, having to depend on your stability, you know, being dependent on a pill. And so I just went through a lot of that. But then I just made the decision where I was like, you know, maybe this is temporary, maybe it's permanent. I don't know, but this is the best thing that I need to do for me right now. And so I went on my first or my second, I should say, antidepressant with the actual diagnosis, as well as like decided to go to therapy on a regular basis. And the rest of, you know, what I started doing with Real Girls F.A.R.T and all of that has been from that day actually.
Yeah. So that was since 2016. So tell us about Real Girls F.A.R.T.
So it really, you know, it's funny because you're actually, the way you said it is actually so awesome because most people get so weirded out by the word. And they won't say it like without being nervous to say it, but you said it very
You
confidently.
know
So
why I said it confidently? Because my boys always say it. So they taught
uh,
me how to say fart with no problem.
yeah, see, exactly. So so what's funny about that is that I grew up in a house with brothers. I don't have any sisters. So we are a family that, was very open about potty humor.
Uh-huh.
So like I could easily say the word fart without like flinching. Like it is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
So when I when I got diagnosed, probably 7 years even before the diagnosis, Michael and I, my husband, we had a joke. I would just joke around with him and we would, we just fart in front of each other and joke around about, I don't know, it was just like, our little thing we did. And we would talk, about it. And so one day I must have been playing around with him and I must have farted or something. And he was like, oh my God. He's like, how can somebody so pretty, like, do something that horrible? And I turned around and I looked at him and I was like, hey, I was like, real girls fart.
Mm.
I was like, and anybody who says different, they're not real. And I laughed it off. And then I went out the room. Literally, this was 7 years ago, 7 years before diagnosis, 7 years before like anything was going on. And I said, I came back in the room and I said, Michael, I was like, oh my God. I was like, that's a book. And I never meant for it to be an acronym. I never meant for it to have like the mental health, or mental illness aspect to it. It was more so of like, man, there was something in me at that moment to like debunk the myths that girls or women have to be a certain way and can't say certain things because then that means that we are less ladylike than other people.
Mm.
So that's what its original meaning and intention was.
Mm-hmm.
And then 7 years, you fast forward 7 years, and I have this diagnosis, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this could not be more perfect. Because fart typically is something that we as women, we are not supposed to do out loud. We are not supposed to say the word. And mental health, mental illness, there's so much stigma associated with that. So in a way, I think I use the word fart to for shock value and to jar someone and to say, hey, take a look at this. Listen up. We as women have struggles and we don't have to be perfect.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, society making us feel and think that we have to be perfect or live perfect is what contributes to bad psychological conditions for all of us.
Yeah.
And we need to remove the stigma off of all of these things that we are supposed to be or do as women. And so that was the birth of, or the start of, Real Girls F.A.R.T.
Is this a community where you meet on a regular basis, or is this via your blog that you give resources? What does that look like?
So 3 years ago, so like, okay, when I first got diagnosed and I decided to start Real Girls F.A.R.T, it was just a blog. And where I would just get on there like once a week and I would just talk about like motherhood and like being a mom, with generalized anxiety and depression, and how it came out in my parenting and just really being a resource for other women who, may have been going through the same thing.
Mm.
And then from the blog, it kind of grew into, you know what? Wouldn't it be really cool if for us to have these same conversations or guided discussions about a particular topic that's kind of in this ballpark in real life? So then I started planning my, set of events. And so that was cool. And then at the same time, I was like, it'd be really neat because I was getting so much positive feedback from the blog and from the events that I was like, I really should take all of these experiences and things that I'm learning in therapy about myself and about my relationships with people and put it in a book. And that's where I started writing the book, Be Free, Be You.
Okay.
So Real Girls F.A.R.T is like an online platform we receive submissions from women, all races, all over the world, where they tell their stories. It doesn't have to be mental health related. It could be focused on like, other women's issues, like they want to talk about infertility and, what that did for them, or like, just all kinds of things that we as women, battle with, deal with. It's a platform where we share stories, we share ideas, we encourage each other. And then we're getting ready to come up actually on the planning of our event season. Typically, it runs from spring to the end of summer.
Okay. And then your book spawned out of this too. Be Free, Be You, right?
Yes, yes. Be Free, Be You spawned out of that as well. Impacted my relationships with people and with men and, with my husband and with my kids. And how I had to learn how to be a friend before I could find friends. And, just really taking other women through, I guess, my journey that I went through in becoming my most authentic self.
Achea, thank you for being on the show. Where can people find you if they want to reach out to you, or maybe if they want to contribute to your blog?
So we are on Facebook and Instagram as at Real Girls F.A.R.T. You can also go to my website, realgirlsf.com, and you can sign up, and then you can register to submit your blog from there.
Thanks for listening to Time Out with Tinseltown Mom. If you liked what you heard today, please be so kind and rate, review, and subscribe on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. Until next time.